Welcome to the Island Show as part of the Nothing Exempt Podcast Network. I'm Nick Pardini with Brian Piotr, and today we're talking about the world's second biggest island, New Guinea. So, Brian, tell us about the geography of New Guinea. Where is New Guinea, and what are some of the natural features, climate about it?
Well, first off, let me say if you're listening to this show because I've shared this on Twitter or Reddit or someplace else, I want you to know that this is on a separate feed now, a new Apple iTunes podcast called The Island Show. So if you could subscribe to this because you like this show, all our island shows moving forward will be on this feed and not on our Nothing Exempt feed. So moving into the island of New Guinea. This island is like Nick said, the second largest island on Earth. It's 1,500 miles long and about 400 miles at its widest. On the western half, it is actually the country of Indonesia, and on the eastern half, you have the island or the country of Papua New Guinea. It is a very tropical climate with peaks in the middle of the island going up to 16,000 feet almost. And so it is one of the most rugged, difficult places to get to. And for that reason, there's always been myths of unmet tribes in Papua New Guinea or Indonesia on this island. It's so large and it's so sparsely populated. There's there's been myths and proven stories too of cannibalist tribes and tribes that are pygmy or completely unmet by people. So it's a very diverse
Yeah, pygmies are in
ecological.
Africa, I thought.
What?
Pygmies are in Africa. I don't think there's pygmies. That's a specific ethnicity in Central
Sorry,
Africa.
the word may not be pygmy, but like 4 foot tall tribes of people.
Okay.
I don't know what the politically correct term is. If you guys are listening, you know what the politically correct term is. Please let me know. But anyways, extremely ecologically diverse. If you have watched a nature show in the last 20 years and you've seen birds, what do they call it? Birds of whatever, like the dancing, colorful birds trying to get a mate. That's on this island, or more than likely on this island. Natural features include uh, volcanoes and waterfalls and other mountains. It's a beautiful place. It's also an extremely hazardous place for your health. Just trying to manage uh, a climate and a location that is unforgiving and tropical. So it's if you need to be if you broke a leg and you need to go to hospital, you're likely looking forward to a long boat trip to a helicopter somewhere or some kind of combination like that. It's its demographics. Um, I think that's a good place to stop it off and hand it over to Nick on how you would get there and what the center's locations are and where do
Okay.
you go as a tourist.
Papua New Guinea is a very remote place, even though it is in between two relatively populous and geopolitically important countries, which is like the rest of the Indonesian archipelago and Australia. New Guinea itself is kind of isolated. West Papua, which is the Indonesian province, which is the western part of the island, you get there mainly connecting through other parts of Indonesia. Probably you'd have to fly to Jakarta most likely first, and then connect from there to get to West Papua. For the eastern side of the island, there's really only one major city and port of entry, and that's Port Moresby, which is the capital, which is a pretty small city. It's less than 300,000 people, and even though it's the biggest city on the second biggest island in the world, and you can get there through a cruise ship. You get there also by flying, and really, Papua New Guinea is not that well connected to the rest of the world. I mean, the only really places you can get to country wise to Jackson's International Airport, which is the main airport there, is either through Australia. You could go from Brisbane or Sydney, and or you can fly in from Hong Kong or Manila. Those are the kind of the two, like, yeah, and then those are the places you can get to Papua New Guinea from. It's not a tourist hub by any stretch of the means. It's known to be very crime ridden, especially Port Moresby itself, where there's a lot of gang related violence. In fact, they had an Asia Pacific Economic Cooperation Conference, APEC, in 2018 that they did it on a separate cruise ship out of the city due to fears of crime and lack of hotel infrastructure and space for a conference of that size. So this is not like a super touristically friendly. This is like if you're going to New Guinea, it's a very rugged place. Speaking of that, Brian, tell us a little about the culture and the demographics of the island.
Okay, so this island, for its size, extremely ex- very sparsely populated. There are 11 million people on the island, 8 million of which live in the Papua New Guinea side, which is the eastern half. And if you look at the other islands in the Indo-Pacific region, I don't know what the right term is for those sets of islands,
Oceania
Oceania.
and Indonesia.
Indonesia has half the island. 3 million Indonesians live on that island, but that's it
They're
for
not
one of the most
necessarily
populous.
Indonesian, though.
What'd
They're
you say, Mel?
not
Or sorry, what?
necessarily like the same. They're not Javanese. They're not the dominant ethnicity of Indonesia out there. I mean, there are some Javanese people, but
Look,
it's
that has nothing to do with my point I'm going to make. It's that Indonesia has 264 million people in it. It's one of the most populous and fastest growing countries on earth. And it has a large percentage of its land mass on the island of New Guinea. Yet, only 3 million people in the country live there. So the point I'm trying to make is this is a sparsely populated place, and it's because it's a difficult place to live. That said, there's still 11 million people there. That's not a 50,000 person island. These 11 million people have like the record for the most different languages on an island, and I don't even know what the number is. Is it like did you look up what that number was, Nick?
over 10,000. I'm not
10,000 different languages.
sure. Yeah.
And I'd say the reason for this diversity of language is it's hard to move around the island. There's no central road system that is used. There's no freeway system. They're all, for the most part, paths around the country. And if you want to go from one place to the other, best way is to take a boat. And yet, this island can support life, lots of life, and life in abundance, but in small pockets and small different groups and villages and peoples. Their culture is just as diverse as their languages. You know, we have some people in the cities or towns that live a relatively high end life, but most people live a pre electricity, pre running water lifestyle, and for their cuisine, they they rely on similar foods that you would see in Hawaii or Fiji or Indonesia prior to imports and exports, which are the taro root, yams, um, those types of vegetables, and pork. As there's not like a uh, herding lifestyle there, most of the livestock that you'll see will be pigs, which is similar to the other islands around the area. The religion breakup had that open. Number one religion on the island was Catholicism. Uh, Nick, why don't you talk a little bit about the history, and I'll figure out what the breakup on the religion is before you get
Okay,
back.
so the first inhabitants of New Guinea arrived there at least 50,000 years ago, back when the Southeast Asia and the Indonesian archipelago were connected either via land or that the boat journey was relatively small. Uh, this was when, during the Ice Age, where there were much lower sea levels overall in the earth. And so that's how people first got there. And there's a variety of different levels of development with across the island because there's thousands of tribes that are spread out across the island, and they reach different levels of development. Some really just stayed as like small hunter gatherer bands. A few of them developed agriculture, but it generally didn't advance really past like the Neolithic era in other parts of the world until the colonial intervention. Um, and when we had the first colonial presence was when a Spanish navigator, Alvaro de Salverde, um, sorry, came and discovered it. But you really didn't see much of a presence in New Guinea by Europeans really until the 19th century, when the Netherlands in 1828 formally claimed the western half of the island. They were controlling large parts of modern day Indonesia at the time, and they added that to the Dutch East Indies. And then later came the British and the Germans came to claim the eastern half of the island, with the northern part of Papua New Guinea being German New Guinea and the British claiming the southern part. And this is kind of how it was until about World War One. And then after World War One, the Germans lost their claim, went to the British, and eventually the British transferred control of New Guinea from direct rule to indirect rule via Australia. And then after World War II, when the Japanese came in and invaded the island and Indonesia, there were some of the most bloody conflicts within the Pacific theater in New Guinea. I mean, Dan Carlin actually did a good job talking about the Pacific Front and how hospitable this territory was for Allied troops to come to during the war with Japan because of all the topography and the climate and disease and the lack of development. It made some of the toughest battles in the Pacific theater took place in New Guinea. But after World War II, the Dutch were basically able to maintain control of their colonies, and they let Indonesia go. The in the 1940s, but they 1949 to be specific, but they kept West Papua for another 20 years, and they tried to let it have an agreement to make West Papua a separate independent country because the demographics, especially the religious background of West Papua, differed greatly from the rest of Indonesia, which is primarily Muslim. But the Indonesians didn't want anything to do with it. And they thought since it was part of the Dutch East Indies, then all the former Dutch East Indies should be part of the modern day Indonesia. So the Indonesians took it over in 1969, and it's been part.
And well, on that point, I'd found the answers, and let me just put in there that the most recent census I don't know if there's more recent data than this, but in 2000 there were still less than 5,000 followers of Islam on the island.
Yeah, I think there's a
With
little
a
more now because the Indonesian government has made a priority to migrate people from Java and Sumatra to West Papua to get a better control, kind of like what
that
China's trying to do in the Tibet situation.
I completely understand. That makes sense that government is trying to do that. So the breakup as it was in 2000 was 27% Roman Catholic, 19.5% Lutheran, so 11% United Church, 10% Seventh Day Adventist, 8% Pentecostal. These are all Christian denominations for the vast majority of people on the island. Until you
Yeah,
get down to the less than 1%, you don't see other faiths.
yeah, like with Papua, there's among the islands in the Indonesian archipelago. This was the one where they had the most. The missionaries from the Netherlands and England had the most success relative to the more Islam-dominated places, because it used to be a more animistic, pagan style religious environment, and in some of the more remote tribes, it still is that way. And a lot of the Christians there have a more like syncretic connection to their old animist beliefs. But the back to the history. So yeah, that's what happened to West Papua. It's still part of Indonesia. A lot of the West Papuans are trying to have a referendum to break off of Indonesia because West Papua has a fraction of the population that is of different religious and ethnic background than the rest of Indonesia, but it also has a lot more natural resources disproportionately to the rest of Indonesia. Like the world's biggest gold mine, the Grasberg mine, which was owned by Freeport McMoran until it was recently nationalized by the Indonesian government, is on West Papua. They also have abundant supplies of copper, oil, timber, and a variety of other natural resources, especially on a per person basis. So that's the eastern side. Um, Remained part of Australia until 1975 when Australia granted Papua New Guinea full independence. And it is still an independent country today. It struggled to develop due to a lot of the reasons Brian stated, just about the geography and the relative remoteness of the place. And they still have a lot of these remote tribes. Like anthropologists, basically, since this place was discovered by the West, have come here to kind of explore like what uncontacted pre-modern societies look like and what it means for broader human nature that's even affected by civilization. So that's the history of of, of New Guinea.
Okay, so moving on to things to do. This is very much an ecotourist hotspot. There are animals, flora, and fauna that you cannot find other places on Earth. There are thousands of species that you can go see on this island that may you may not be able to see again. You don't know. There's, as far as being able to go see and visit places that no one else on Earth has gone to or seen because of its difficulty in getting there and difficult conditions to deal with once you're there. You can really be like the ultimate ecotourist by going to Papua New Guinea or the western part of the island.
And it's very popular among scuba divers.
Yeah, and on top of it, if you have a computer or a phone, type in beautiful nature in New Guinea and just look at these wonderful pictures. Obviously, it's like filtering for like the best pictures, but the mountains are just stunningly beautiful and covered in green. The rivers, the waterfalls, and the beaches, they're all beautiful. I would say that it might be extremely difficult to logistically deal with getting there and spending time there, but once you're there, I can't say that anything's um, ugly. So, uh, if you're into nature, you want to watch birds, you want to go scuba diving, this is a great place to go. I think that that's like numbers 1, 2, and 3 for reasons you would go there. I guess you could tour a mine, which there's a couple of massive mines, but that's more of a joke. Nick, is there anything else that you would do if you were there?
I don't really think I would go there personally. It's too like, I mean, the safety concerns outweigh the nature. That's just my view.
Yeah. Well, Nick, you're not really into nature.
That you really think I'm not into nature?
Absolutely.
I mean,
No, I think you're into being comfortable, and like a beach resort in Mexico is not nature.
oh, or a golf course, that not nature.
Golf course is not nature. It's man-made nature, natural.
Yeah, I mean, I like nature in small doses. Like, I'll go on a hike in like a tropical rainforest, or go camel riding in the desert, or walk along a beach or something for like a half a day, and then I'm done.
But realistically, Nick, what's the furthest you've ever been from a road or airport?
A road or an airport.
Yeah.
I've been up in the mountains in Colorado, over by Aspen, probably about a half a day hike away from like a street.
So realistically, a 4-hour hike. meaning it's 2 miles an hour, let's say four, you were walking fast, 4 miles an hour, 16 miles at the very furthest you've ever been away from civilization.
Yeah,
And on this island, you can literally get 800 miles. I don't know what the actual max is, but let's say at least a couple hundred miles away from anything
but it's
regarding
like relative
civilization.
civilization. Like when you're driving like, on a freeway, like in the middle of nowhere, but there's nothing but the road. Does that count as civilization?
Yes,
Okay.
because if you break down worst case scenario, you wait until morning, like you're less than 12 hours away from somebody helping you. Like you have no cell service, it's in the middle of the night, you're going to have to sleep in your car. Absolute worst case scenario is the next morning you like get someone to pull over and help you out. So that's pretty much civilization. And I'd say like 50 miles on a dirt road in Montana, that is pretty far away from civilization, but not any kind
Okay,
of
Brian,
interstate highway.
what's the farthest you've been away from civilization? Because clearly I'm in my little civilizational bubble.
That's a good question. I would guess about 40 miles on backpacking trips.
Yeah. If I probably had to guess, it was 10 to 12 for me, given
But
how.
always in America. So even in backcountry in America, people can reach you with a helicopter if things go wrong. I've never been anywhere where that was not the case, where some like basically civilization can come and get you.
There's not that many places left where that is the case, but I think definitely New Guinea is one of them.
Yeah, definitely New Guinea is one of them. Like
Like if you were,
if you get malaria there and you need to go see a doctor, you can, but it will not be quick.
but yeah,
You can get to places where that is a couple days away.
yeah, you might have to be fly out to Australia to get treatment.
Or Singapore, or actually I don't know by flight what the nearest.
Australia is closest.
Of course, Australia, the continent, is closest, but I'm talking about a first world hospital. Where's the first
I mean, there's
closest one of
Cairns,
those?
which is the northernmost, I think, like major city in Queensland, which is somewhat close. I don't really know what the distance is from Cairns.
Those distances on a map are always so skewed and wrong because the equatorial perspective makes those distances seem closer.
Yeah,
And
it's about an hour and 25-minute flight from Port Moresby to Cairns.
wow, that's really not that far. That's like probably 800 miles.
So yeah, but that's still pretty far for like your closest like place to go. Like if you have a real emergency that
I mean,
requires a specialist.
I'm sure there's a hospital in Port Moresby,
Yeah, there is.
but if
But
you're on the western side of the island and you're 1,500 miles away from that, you're maybe going to Indonesia.
so yeah, Brian, I answered this question. Would you visit there though?
It's so not on the top of my list because of it being on the other side of the planet. And if I'm on the other side of the planet, I have a lot of places over there that I'd like to go visit. And they're mostly touristy places, but I would say in the radius of a flight, Tokyo is just as far away from me as New Guinea is, plus or minus an hour or two in the air. So even though they are not close to each other, I'd rather go to Japan if I'm going to make that length of trip in that
Japan's a
general
lot
direction.
closer to fly because it's much further north.
Once you're going over 8 hours, I don't really care if it's 20. Like,
Uh, it's a
like
10-hour flight.
it is a huge difference for 2 to 8, and it is a minimal difference from 8 to 20.
It's a 10-hour flight from Los Angeles to Tokyo. If you
Yeah,
wanted
and
to
how,
get to New Guinea, I don't really. I'm actually going to look at the time for that because you could fly from Tokyo to Port Moresby. Um, like if you wanted to fly to Tokyo to Port Moresby, that's another 11 hours.
There's got to be a more direct flight than flying through Tokyo.
No, you could fly through Tokyo or Australia. We talked about this in the how to get there section.
Yeah, I'm saying there's got to be a more direct flight than that. Like, I bet Singapore has a flight to Port Moresby. That's
It
more in
does.
the general direction.
Like, but to Singapore, from let's say from Los Angeles, Singapore is about 16, 17 hours, and not counting layovers. And then if you want to fly from Singapore to Port Moresby, yeah, that's going to be at least another 5 hour flight. It's not that close. Like this might be one of the farthest places to get to from the United States in terms of airtime.
You're still under, if you add those together, you're still under a day. I
But
see
you can get
round
anywhere
trip
now.
tickets. I
That's
don't think
the,
that's not true.
I mean, I flew to India and it took a little under a day to get there.
Right. Well, you're talking about getting to a major airport in India.
But that's exactly on the opposite side of the world, pretty much, from Los Angeles.
Yeah. Well, you can get to Singapore, which is like the other side of the world, nonstop almost. That's only 16 hours,
Singapore's a lot closer than India.
but it's further than Port Moresby. Really, the issue is there's no direct flight to such a small
Yeah,
city.
yeah, you have to connect through Australia or Japan or Hong Kong. Like that's but I mean, I think we're repeating ourselves on this, but yeah, this the bottom line is it's very difficult to get to, and I'd rather go to Australia first because I've never been there.
It's so weird that I've hardly visited any place compared to you, and yet I've been to Australia twice.
Yeah, and you've been to New Zealand. I've gone neither of those places.
But I mean, you've been to so many countries I've never even been in that general part of the world, like South America.
Well, yeah, I mean, I've basically not been to really anywhere in the southern hemisphere, excluding Fiji and South America.
Hey, we've both been to Fiji.
You know,
Hey, if I'm sure I've said this on the show, but if you're ever flying from America to Australia or New Zealand, do a layover in Fiji because it'll cost you nothing extra in terms of airfare. It'll cost you extra in terms of what you spend on the island, but it's like a free layover. That's 5 hours away from Australia. It cuts the flight down a tiny bit on your way back, so totally worth it. You're not likely to fly all the way to Fiji often, or when else are you going to fly the 11 hours there when you could fly 5 hours to Hawaii or 7 hours to the Bahamas or whatever it is. So it's like a great combination to go to Australia and Fiji. I was only there for 36 hours for the layover, but it was great. I would do it again.
all right. And for people who want to learn more about the island show or have questions or comments about New Guinea, how can they reach us?
Go to our subreddit Nothing Exempt, or go to our Twitter Nothing Exempt, and tweet at us or post. And if you like this show, we've been doing Nothing Exempt now for 2 years, but specifically focusing on islands and splitting it off is new to us. This show just released on iTunes. If you're listening to this, we'd appreciate it if you gave it one of its first reviews ever. As far as what we should do next time, we'd appreciate your suggestion. Think of islands that you'd like to hear about or learn about, and reach out to us. We'll look at them. Okay, guys, until next time.